This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the American Monetary Association's podcast, where we explore how monetary policy impacts the real lives of real people and the action steps necessary to preserve wealth and enhance one's lifestyle.
Let's welcome back a guest who's been on several times, and that is none other than Doug Casey. He is the founder of International Man, also Casey Research, which he's not as directly involved with anymore. He's an author of several great books and a real thought leader on various investments and situations, and we're obviously all in a situation now, so I wanted to invite him back. Doug, it's great to have you back on, and you're coming to us from Argentina, is that correct? Or no, Ecuador, right?
No, across the Plate River. I'm in Uruguay.
Okay.
A farm here.
Fantastic. And then you also, at least used to, live in Aspen half of the year, and then South America the other half of the year. Is that about right?
That's right. I still have my ranch in Aspen, but it's questionable whether I'll even go back there this summer.
Yeah. Well, I met you in Aspen, and we did a live interview in person there, and that was a lot of fun. I think maybe that was the last time you were on the show, but a lot has changed in the world. What is your take on the coronavirus pandemic situation? Is this an overreaction? Is the reaction maybe bigger than the problem, or what are you thinking, Doug?
It's a gigantic overreaction. The hysteria that's going on right now is the biggest in the way of hysteria since the witch trials of the
Salem,
late 17th century.
Wow.
It's hugely overblown. The fact of the matter is that the ordinary seasonal flu kills someplace between 25,000 and 60,000 Americans a year, and always has. The death toll from this isn't going to be anything near that. But these morons have totally shut down the economy. And I don't think it's going to recover very easily. So this is a man-made disaster. And I'm not talking about the virus itself. I have no idea what it is. It's just another virus. There are hundreds of viruses that pass through the population and always have. But people only really isolated viruses as a kind of life form. It was only 70 or 80 years ago. So these things have been going on since day one. This is just one among many. And it should be, and would have been, just forgotten. But it's not. This has turned into a major disaster for no good reason.
Okay, I don't want to get into the debate because we'll burn up a lot of time of, is this different than the flu or not? There are some differences, even though the death numbers are, the issue you mentioned is definitely correct. But there's the contagiousness, there's the treatment, there's the overwhelming the healthcare system possibility, there's the fact that, on the normal flu, you usually don't need ventilators. So some differences. I mean, you agree with that, right?
Well, look, I'm not a virologist. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a medical expert. And I don't really trust anything that you see on the news these days.
Yeah, fair enough.
So who really knows?
Right.
All I can say is that I don't personally know anybody that's been afflicted by the virus.
Okay, fair enough. So the economy, let's jump on that. Now, the economy is in uncharted territory. I mean, I like to say, Doug, that we are witnessing the biggest money printing extravaganza in world history. And we're just seeing the beginning of it now. The 2.2 trillion is just the beginning. At least that's my take on it. What do you think about this, the various bailouts, the various aid, and it feels like we're galloping towards socialism. I mean, wow, it's absolutely crazy.
Well, it's a catastrophe in the making. The analogy I like to use is that since the meltdown of 2008, look at that as being entering the leading edge of a huge financial hurricane. We went through that leading edge of the hurricane in 2008 and 9 and 10. A very big hurricane, so we've been going through a very big eye of the storm. Now we're entering the trailing edge of the storm, and it's going to be much worse, much different, and much longer lasting than the unpleasantness that we might remember from 2008 and 9 and 10.
Okay, so your metaphor is that for the past 8 to 10 years coming out of the Great Recession, and I'm sort of using 2012 as the kind of coming out of the Great Recession, even some would consider it 2010. But 8-10 years was the eye of the hurricane. And now, in the eye, it's sort of calm, right? There's been a good economy. Things have been growing. There's a wealth effect that's been going on that last 8 or 10 years. And now we're going to get the other part of the storm, right? Is that the way you're looking at it?
That's right. And what happened is that the government caused the disaster of 2008 and so forth by creating gigantic distortions and misallocations of capital. Look, we can go back a lot further. Western civilization itself, which incidentally is the only civilization in the history of the world that actually even counts, it peaked in 1914 and has been going downhill since then. That's not to say that science and technology, which are the sole fruits of, which are among the fruits of Western civilization, the only civilization that has meaningful science and technology. But science and technology has been increasing at the rate of Moore's law for the last 100 years, but the civilization itself has been going downhill. So
tell us what you mean by that, because I sometimes like to say with a friend of mine that we think civilization peaked in 1990. Now, granted, there's been technological advance since then, but I'm talking about the culture war. What do you mean by that? When you say 1914, well, okay, you're probably talking about the Federal Reserve and the IRS coming along, right? Is that where you're going?
Those are two of the things that I'm talking about. Okay. But the essence of Western civilization, what started with the Greeks in the 5th century BC, there's all kinds of things that have changed over the years, and that's an entirely separate conversation. But I think that what we're looking at here is something much more serious than just a financial meltdown. I think it's going to turn into an economic meltdown. We're going to have gigantic political changes. It's going to turn into a social meltdown, too, as well. The United States itself, incidentally, is no longer really a country. It's a multicultural domestic empire at this point. And it's very hard to hold something like that together. We no longer have a binding culture where people that live in the geographic area called the United States, they no longer share anything that resembles a common religion, even a common language, common culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So much for America being a melting pot lately, right? It's more of a tossed salad. Would that be a fair statement?
Well, that's right. It's a tossed salad where its components don't even go together very well.
Right, a mismatched tossed salad. It's not that the ingredients don't taste good together. Yeah, okay, all right.
So this whole thing, the virus, is really just the pin that broke the gigantic financial bubble that was created by the government creating trillions of dollars starting in 2008. And it wasn't only the U.S. government, it's all the major governments around the world that have created trillions and trillions of their own currencies. Now that the pin has broken the bubble, they can no longer reduce interest rates any further. They're already zero or below zero in Europe and Japan, close to zero in the U.S. Can they create a lot more money? Well, they're doing that. But these trillions of dollars, basically helicopter money, maybe they're going to bull up the markets again, the financial markets. Sure, that's the first place the money goes. But this time around, we're going to have huge price rises on a retail level. Food, shelter, clothing, basics of that nature are all going to start heading up strongly at the very time.
You mean prices of those things?
Exactly.
Okay, right. So in inflation in food, clothing, shelter, you said, right?
Exactly. We've had plenty of inflation in the financial markets where stock prices
asset inflation versus consumer price inflation. Got it.
Exactly. And even bond prices are at an all-time high. This next time around, actually, the big problem this time around isn't going to be so much the stock market, although we've just started upon this bear market. The big problem is going to be in bonds. They're a triple threat to your capital. you have the inflation risk, the currency that the dollars that you get back are going to go down in value very rapidly over the next decade. You've got the interest rate risk. Interest rates now at an all-time low are going to start heading back up to the levels they were in the early 80s and beyond. And by that, I mean 15 and 20% and higher. And last, the default risk. There's so much debt in the world, a lot of it's not going to be paid. So bonds are about the worst place for your money at this point.
Okay, and I'd agree with that. Bonds are very vulnerable to inflation. So I would definitely agree with you there. Oh, okay, so, I mean, would it be fair to say that you're a gold bug?
Well, I believe that gold is proven as being the best kind of money. It has unique characteristics that are really only true of gold, that make it especially useful for money. Steel is especially useful for buildings and cars, and aluminum is good for cans and airplanes, and every one of the 92 naturally occurring elements has unique characteristics. And gold is the most durable and divisible of all the naturally occurring elements, is especially good as money. That's why it's always been used as money. So I think the world is going to go back to gold. And the idea of national currencies that are not even paper anymore because they want to go digital with them, which is a total disaster from a personal freedom point of view.
Meaning a private, because let me just expand on that for a moment. If you don't have privacy in the way you allocate your resources, if you don't have privacy in the way you spend your money, that is a very big concern for liberty. Okay, financial privacy. If the government can track through a digital dollar or a cryptocurrency that is sponsored by the central banks and the governments, then you have no privacy. They know everything you buy. They know they know how much you have, and they know everything you buy, and they know what you spend. They know if you bought a gun, they know if you bought a face mask, they know if you bought a new phone, you went to a strip club. Okay, so this is very risky that they do that. And I already see them through this crisis paving the way to that. China, as this first started to break out, there were articles about how the currency is dangerous because it carries germs. And people can become infected by using the currency. And China is fairly cashless, by the way. At least when I was there, people were using WeChat to pay for lots of things and just not a lot of cash being used. Of course, the Scandinavian countries are almost completely cashless. Some places in the US are cashless, where they literally say, please no cash, use a credit card, use Apple Pay or Google Pay. So this is a big concern. As far as cryptocurrencies go, I think the one that'll win the game is not going to be Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything else. It's going to be the one sponsored by the governments and the central banks.
I'm certainly going to avoid using any government or central bank cryptocurrency.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying I like the idea of them winning the game. I'm just saying because they're the governments and central banks are the most powerful entities the human race has ever known, they will force it upon us. They'll just tell us that's what we have to use. There are now legal tender laws about the dollar saying it's for all debts, public and private, right? It says it right on the currency, and they'll just make us use it, right?
Well, I suppose they will, but this is one of the advantages of living in out-of-the-way, backward countries, as I do. I mean, I've traveled many times, most of these countries many times, to 155 different countries. I've lived in 10 different countries. And I find that I generally prefer living in these quiet, backward countries, even countries that have, especially countries that have serious economic problems, because bringing capital from outside, I can have an extraordinarily high standard of living at a very low cost. But getting back to what you were saying, yes, the world is going to go in that direction. I don't know what you can do about it. If the whole world starts to resemble Germany in the 1930s or the Soviet Union from the way it was from the 1920s to the 1980s, there's not much you can do about it. And unfortunately, most people worship their governments. They think that their governments are necessary and important and good. I've been a philosophical anarchist for many years. I don't believe that the institution of government itself is either necessary or moral. But that's a philosophical statement.
And that would take an awfully long time to discuss. So let's skip that one for now. But okay, got it. So the next things to expect, we both agree that we're going to see more socialism, more government intrusion in our lives, the movement toward a government-sponsored cryptocurrency. Do we all agree on that?
Yep, that's what's going to happen. And that's definitely in the cards. We're going to see much higher levels of inflation, which is just, on the part of the central banks, which create the currency, they're going to be creating tons of new currency, whether it's the old currency that we use now or the new one. It'll be much easier for them to do that. It'll create more distortions in the market. What we've entered upon is what I call the Greater Depression. As I said before, it's going to be much worse and more serious and different than the unpleasantness, not just of 2008 and on, but of 1929 to 1946. This has the potential to be the biggest upset since the Industrial Revolution. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
It definitely is, and hopefully we will help our listeners at least be comfortable through it or potentially thrive and prosper through it, because economics is a relative game. All you have to do is be ahead of the average, and you are winning, okay? Even if the average declines, just be ahead of it. So if everybody's losing their shirt, and you're treading water and staying the same, you're doing great, okay? And one of the things I would encourage people to do, because one of my other predictions is I mean, there are many, but we're going to see people flee high-density living environments to low-density living environments. They already know now they can usually work at home. We're going to see a move toward a simpler life, I believe, out of this. We are going to see a move toward a nationwide housing assistance program. Maybe it's the Section 8 program we already have expanded or a whole new program. We're going to see more pushes toward universal basic income. And Spain is already in the process of enacting a universal basic income. And this is going to spread around the world, if you ask me. But, when I was a kid, Doug, and I'd encourage people to, go to YouTube or whatever and watch some of the episodes. I used to watch the show The Waltons. I'm sure you know that show. And
yes.
and you just see how simple life was back then, right? I think we see that, we view that when we watch any old era TV or movie. But you look at that, and you also look at the Great Depression and how people in the urban areas, in the high density areas, were hurt the most. And the people that suffered the least were the people living in the more rural, and they really didn't have suburbia back then yet, because that came after World War II in America, which is a uniquely American idea, suburbia. They didn't really, their life didn't change that much at all. They grew their own food, they were self-sufficient, and, they kind of went on with life. But if you were in an urban area, boy, you were in line for soup or whatever you could get, and you couldn't be self-sufficient. And so, there's been this push to push people, maybe it's UN Agenda 21 or whatever, or just, the way society's evolved, toward these high-density urban living environments where they cannot be self-sufficient. You probably have some thoughts on that, especially since you live on ranches anywhere you go, right?
Yes, I agree. You're absolutely correct. There will be a move away from the cities. Now, here in Uruguay, I'm on 1,000 acres. I've got
just 1,000.
Well, that's a very small plot for this part of the world, if you're a landowner.
Yeah.
I mean, across the river in Argentina, I have about 150,000 acres in conjunction with some partners. But this is a much more livable thing to be on. But here, I've got a gym, I've got a pool, I've got a mile of riverfront, I've got dairy cows, beef cows, chickens. So I'm pretty self-contained. I've got a great library, and we're on the internet right now. Mm-hmm. So what else do you need? Actually, nothing that I can think of.
Yep.
You're quite correct on all that you said. I'm intensely optimistic about the long-term future. I'm a believer in Ray Kurzweil's concept of the singularity coming up, perhaps at the end of this generation. Another 20
Well, he predicts 2030 will achieve singularity when the $1,000 computer can do what the human brain can do. right? That's part of the singularity concept that Ray Kurzweil talks about?
That's just part of it.
Yeah. Go ahead and expand on it if you would.
Implications in many, many different areas of life. It could transform life totally, especially when we get into nanotechnology. So if you can hang on for another 20 years, we may live in an absolutely different world, hopefully a much, much better world, but totally different. But what we have to do here is figure out what's going to happen over the next few years. And I believe that the general standard of living is going to go down a lot. The chaos level is going to go up a lot. And the only thing that you can really do other than speculate in the markets to try to stay ahead, although I've got to say that's going to be very hard, because a depression is a time when everybody's standard of living goes down, and the winner is just the person that loses the least.
Right, exactly. That, by the way, listeners, that's a really good point. Doug, can you repeat that?
Yeah. In a depression, the winner is the person that loses the least, because the general standard of living drops in a depression. And that's what we're looking at.
Okay. So tell us how we lose the least. I like it. That's good.
The most important thing is that you have assets where there's no counterparty risk, where you don't have to trust a bank or an insurance company, or for that matter, your pension fund, which is stuffed with bonds and overpriced stocks. So I think that your basic savings should be in the form of gold and silver coins, mostly in your own possession. If you have significant assets, you should have them in more than one political jurisdiction, because your greatest danger today isn't the markets, which are dangerous enough, but it's the political system. It's your government. So you should have lots of gold and silver coins. And if you want to speculate, the best place to be, in my opinion, are mining stocks. They're very cheap right now. Gold mines especially are all making a lot of money at $1,600 an ounce. But they're very cheap because the average financial manager doesn't believe in them. He doesn't understand them. He doesn't own them. That's going to change. They'll pile into them. It's going to be like the contents of Hoover Dam trying to get through a garden hose in the next few years. So that's where I'm concentrated right now. It's mining stocks in general.
Talk to us about mining stocks vis-a-vis cheap oil. That's good news for the miners, right? Where energy gets really cheap because it costs less to bring the metals out of the ground. Is that how you would look at that?
It depends on the type of mine, whether it's an underground mine or an open pit mine, whether the mine is close to civilization or far away. But we can generalize and say that perhaps 20% of the cost of mining is oil related. And of course, oil has fallen in the last couple of months from about $55 down to about $25 at the moment. I don't know how much lower it could go because none of the frackers in the U.S. are making money. In fact, they're all hemorrhaging money at this point.
Right. They were probably going to lose them completely. They're just not going to stay in business.
Probably not unless oil prices go up. But I speculate in commodities, not just the oil and gas and copper and gold, but soybeans and hogs and all cocoa and coffee, all the rest of them. And what I can tell you right now is that none of the producers of commodities, except for gold, are making money. It doesn't matter that the gold miners are making money from gold's point of view, because all the gold that's ever been mined basically is still in existence. That's not true of any other commodity, even silver.
You know, I just got to ask you about that for a second. This still seems pretty far-fetched to me, but it's worth a discussion point. What about mining the asteroids? What about creating these metals in labs? You know, I've read articles about both of those things. And, you know, maybe the supply isn't as limited as we want to believe. This may be far off, but I don't know how far. You know, maybe it's not that far off.
Well, in my one of my books, Crisis Investing for the Rest of the 90s, I talked about exactly this. There are about 6 billion ounces of gold in existence right now, above ground, okay? That's the best guess. Nobody knows for sure. About 80 million ounces per year are produced. So the amount of gold in the world grows by about 1.33%, 1.5% per year. Now, your question was, can that supply go up a lot? Not really here on planet Earth, because all of the high-grade deposits have basically been found. People have been looking for gold for thousands of years, so all the low-hanging fruit's been found. Now, when you find a new gold deposit, you're looking at moving hundreds of millions of tons of ore, and it might grade 1/100th of an ounce per ton. This is next to nothing. Gold mines now it's nothing like the days of Treasure of Sierra Madre. You're talking about gigantic earth-moving operations, extremely capital-intensive and high cost.
Yeah.
Now, what can change that? Will they mine the asteroids? Yes, of course they will. There's no question that many of the asteroids have heavy metals in them, like iridium and rhodium and gold, platinum, among these things. But that's going to be very, very high cost, and that's pretty far in the future still.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 20 or 30 or 40 years. The sea is full of gold. It's full of everything. Everything dissolves into the sea. So can gold be recovered from the sea? People have talked about that for many generations. Well, perhaps bioengineering could breed types of seaweed that can concentrate gold in much the way that spinach concentrates iron. This type of thing could be done. Soon? No, not very soon at all. Could gold be created, transmuted from other elements? Yes, of course. This has been done.
Alchemy, yeah, right.
Well, it can be done. It's just a question of the number of protons in the nucleus of an atom. But
I just wanted to bring that up because, the value of precious metals, diamonds, or most anything else is based on scarcity versus demand. It needs to be scarce and it needs to have high demand. That's how the value is upheld, right? If it's abundant, it has low demand, or if it's abundant, then the demand can be met. If it's scarce and there's demand for it, then the demand can't be met and the price goes up.
That's right.
Yeah, basic economics.
Well,
okay.
Don't worry about a glut of gold anytime in the near future. Okay.
All right.
It's just not an element.
Okay. What else do you want to say? We brought up the part about the move toward socialism and more bailouts and increased government intervention and inflation, an inflationary future. Any more thoughts about that?
I'll just say that we've entered upon the Greater Depression, which is what I call it. And there's not much you can do about it in much the same way that if a society jumps off the top of a 100-story building, they're fine until they hit the ground. But we're about to hit the ground. Hold on to your hat. It's going to be very interesting with all kinds of consequences. One of the most serious of them down the road is going to be military. I mean, we've had World War II, and there will be a World War III. It'll be very, very different from World War II. And I suspect it's going to have a substantial biological component. So all the F-22s and B-2s and the rest of this junk,
they're not going to matter that much.
Well, it's not going to matter. I mean, it's all that's done is help to bankrupt the U.S. So it's going to be interesting to watch on your widescreen.
Who's the war going to be with? Is it going to be China?
Well, look, if it's a biological war, it could be with a really smart kid that lives in a basement in Serbia, for all I know. There are many advantages to biological war, and the U.S. government has been working on this type of thing, mainly at Fort Detrick in the U.S., for decades, and they've spent scores of billions of dollars developing all kinds of nasty things. But with the development of CRISPR and...
that's the gene editing technology.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, over the next generation, just as in the last generation, computer science was the big deal. Over the next generation, I think it's going to be biological science. So, but we'll also have a computer element to World War III because the whole world runs on computers, everything from the electricity grid to the financial system, everything. It's all computer driven. Now, didn't used to be. So you're going to have, World War III is going to be a computer war with a biological war. And of course, there'll still be people running around with AK-47 shooting, but it's going to be nasty.
Any idea when that's coming? Doug, you've cheered us up so much today.
Well, look, I'm just
I'm just kidding.
I'm just calling them the way I see it. I prefer good times much more and I prefer bad times.
Right.
But I didn't make the game.
Yeah, right, of course.
What I would recommend, however, to your listeners, Jason, is that they read the novels that I've written.
Mm-hmm.
You can say many things in the form of fiction that you cannot say, or you perhaps shouldn't say, in the form of nonfiction. So they can go on Amazon and pick up a copy of Speculator, which is about the mining business and a bush war in Africa, and Drug Lord, as our hero goes into that trade, and now Assassin, which will be out in July, where our hero, Charles Knight, investigates the world of assassinations, political assassins in particular. And there are going to be other novels that are even more radical to follow. So you don't want to fall behind. So I would
very interesting. And Doug, those are available at all the usual sources. Do you want to give out a website as well?
Well, go to internationalman.com. I do an interview or two with them every week, and we have a lot of great articles. It's free, but they're fantastic articles on all kinds of things. So internationalman.com is the place to go.
Excellent. And Doug, thanks for sharing some of these thoughts with us today. And let's just close with that idea that in bad times in general, the person who wins is the person who loses the least. And that's what we're here for. It's a relative thing. I always say economics is a relative thing. So like that old cliche, that story of the bear in the woods and the two hikers and the one that's, tightening his shoelaces, and his buddy says, man, you can't outrun a bear. And he says, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. And that's, really what it is about, is losing the least, because everything is relative. Doug Casey, thanks for joining us again.
Okay, my pleasure, Jason.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.